So I'd like to welcome you to this this session of our Land at Lunch series of webinars on community access to land, routes to collaboration. It's part of our ongoing series of webinars which are going to be running throughout the winter. If you go to our website, you'll see the sessions up until Christmas, and soon our sessions from January and February will be also on the website. So do sign up and take part. There's sessions covering all aspects of land issues. Before we start, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Karen Grant, and I'm one of the Good Practice Advisors, a member of the Good Practice team in the Scottish Land Commission. Emma Cooper is here, who you'll be hearing from soon. She's the Head of Land Rights and Responsibilities at the Commission. And Lisa Busby is our Training Coordinator at the Scottish Land Commission. So the purpose of this webinar is to introduce key issues for landowners and communities around community access to land. And that's access which can create opportunities for community benefits, whether that be through ownership, leasing, or other partnership agreements or collaboration with landowners. The plan for this session is that Emma's going to show you a video that introduces some of the issues, and then she's going to talk you through some of the key principles. Then she'll hand over to me, and I am going to signpost you to a lot of the resources available, partly from the Commission, but also from a lot of our other partners that can help you, whether you're a community group or a landowner, to work through the different considerations that you'll have to think about if you're thinking about acquiring access to land or releasing land to the community. Just a quick introduction to the Commission, in case you don't know. The Scottish Land Commission is a public body established in 2017 as a result of the Land Reform Scotland Act. We're wholly funded by the Scottish Government, but we're set up to advise the Scottish Government on land reform issues, and also the team that we represent, the Good Practice team of the Commission, is there to help the integration of the land reform agenda into how our society deals with land issues. So we're working with people on the ground in their relationship with land and their rights and responsibilities. We have 6 commissioners, including the Tenant Farming Commissioner, and 17 staff. I'll get back to a bit more information about how the Commission can support you later on when I'm talking about resources. But for now, I would like to hand over to Lisa, who is going to go through some housekeeping issues.
Thanks, Karen, and hi, everyone. We've just got a few pieces of information and housekeeping to share before we begin. So today's webinar will be recorded, including the chat and the question and answer, and information on how the recording will be used and our full privacy policy is being posted in the chat now. Let me do that.
You're on mute, Lisa, just now.
Ah, was I on mute for the whole time, or just then?
Just as you mentioned that you were putting the privacy policy in the chat.
Perfect. I think I've done 2 things at the one time there. Okay, so everyone's camera and mic are off today by default, but we welcome your questions in the Q&A box and comments in the chat box. The Q&A box can be found at the bottom of your screen. And these questions can be asked anonymously if you prefer, but just remember that your screen name is always visible in the chat. In today's session, we also have the option for you to turn on closed captions or a live transcript. Again, this function is enabled using the CC button on the control panel at the bottom of your screen. Just to flag that these captions are auto-generated, so there may be some inaccuracies outside of our control. We'll also be collating feedback throughout the session in the form of some short Zoom polls, and we're really grateful for your input into these. The polls are anonymous. We won't share the answers to the entire group, and more info on how we use this data I'll post in the chat in just a moment. Lastly, I just want to flag that we'll be signposting a lot of resources today, and I'll be posting links in the chat as we go along, so that if you want to access any of them immediately after the session that are really pertinent to you, you absolutely can. I just want to reassure everyone that we're going to send all the links to all the resources in an email as well. So if you don't quite catch it in real time, you will get a full list of all the resources and links that we mentioned today. And finally, if you have any questions at all on any of the housekeeping, just pop a wee message into the chat. Okay, so it's time to get you involved now. So before I hand over to Emma, I'm just going to launch our first poll. Let me do that. Hopefully you can all see that on your screen now. This poll's super quick. It's just 4 quick questions for us to find out who's in the room today. So if you can scroll through and answer all of those questions, that'd be great. And I'll just be quiet for a few minutes while you complete that. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and hand over to Emma to do the first section of our webinar.
Thanks, Lisa. That's great, and good to see everybody responding to the poll just there. I'm going to show you a short video that we put together around last year, I think, and it's about Newcastleton, and it's about a negotiated transfer. So in this case, the transfer is the sale of land to the community, and it's told from the community's perspective, and there are some really helpful pointers in there, I think, for people to think about. And after I've shown the video, I'm then going to go through what I think are some of the kind of routes to collaboration and some of the top tips that you can be thinking about, things that are really kind of core to consider when you're looking to negotiate or collaborate with somebody. Then I'll pass back to Karen, who's going to talk you through resources, as we said earlier. So in this video, some of the core points that I see coming across are that the community is really clear on their objectives for owning the land, and that's really important. They are willing to negotiate with the landowner, and the landowner is willing to negotiate with them. So there's a real sense there that everybody is open to thinking about what the other party needs, and happy to do some kind of compromising around that as well. It also talks in the video a bit about having the right skills and the right people in place, and finding those people in your community and connecting with the right kind of people being really important. There's also a real sense of commitment coming through from the people who are involved, needing to see it through for the long term. It's not a short-term project, land ownership, it's there for the long term. And there's also a sense of wanting to see or being sure that the ideas for the land use are really clear and realistic. I think you'll pick those things up from the video, which I'm just going to play just now.
Newcastleton's is an island within an island. We're basically 25 miles from Hawick, 25 miles from Carlisle. Hawick to the north, Carlisle to the south. It's a seriously friendly place. You ask anyone that comes, and we are very, very friendly and accommodating, and we'll go out of your way to help anyone. In the last 50 years since the Waverley line closed, I'd seen a decline in the village, seen lots of my friends move, and the lack of employment. We've lost 200, 300, 400 jobs here over the last 50 years. And it got to a time where he thought there's never going to be any help here. We didn't seem to be getting any help. And we were probably reaching a crisis point in the village when this land buyout came around, that we dropped our population from just about 1,000 to about 750. And it was quite frightening when we looked at the demographics and the age. That's, I think, what originally kicked us on to start change the demographics and get more younger people in here, and to keep our young people here. First heard of the buyout, I think it was in May 2019. Within 2 or 3 nights of meeting, we already had a plan devised of what we were going to do, and we approached Buccleuch, and thankfully Buccleuch extended the deadline from the August, extended it to the December. In the end, we probably had 6 months to raise approximately £1 million. You know, there were 7,500 acres we were offered, and in the end we took 750 acres because to us that was the best land for development. It was close to the village, and it was the land that the village knew. We've brought 2 or 3 projects now to fruition, so we've a proven track record in doing community work that benefits a small rural community. I think for this moment in time, we had the right people, we had the right combination of people. We had people who knew the funders, we had people who, you know, who knew how to talk to government, who had very experienced business backgrounds, and then you had people like myself and 2 or 3 others from the village that understood the land. You could speak to the community and they trusted you. It was 100% agreement that we try and do this. They see the land as I see the land. It's their land. It was the land that you walked on as a child. You know, the river is the river that you swam in as a child. You know, the golf course is there where we all played golf. We walk these hills. We know them like the back of our hands, and it's ground that our forefathers or grandparents used and farmed. It's of huge historical significance to the village, the home hill. And for any community that is thinking of doing the same, you've got, once you started, you've got to be in it for the long run. You can't just duck out halfway through. You've got to commit to doing it.
Young families tend not to live here because of the isolation and because we don't have the facilities that other towns and villages may have. So the land buyout is such a marvellous opportunity for us to develop it for our young people, to encourage young families to stay in the village. We want people to come and visit, we want people to stay here, and we want all the opportunities. And by purchasing the land, that's what's going to happen. But what's blown me away is the innovation, the ideas and innovation of what potentially we could do with the land. Forestry, dark skies, solar energy possibly. That in the back of my head, I never thought we'd even be looking at. But there's just so many different ideas that's coming up. Great ideas, doable ideas, really realistic ones that will really benefit everybody in the community. Point of the land was for us to sustain ourselves as a village and a community. So anything we can add to that, it just makes us bigger and better. I want my children to stay here, yeah. I want my children to stay here. I want my children to want to stay here. I want them to love the community like I love it and be part of that community and grow up and have a family and stay here, be able to work here. I want there to be opportunities for my children that perhaps I didn't have in the village because we didn't have the facilities when I was younger. So we want to have the balance of the older generation and the younger generation as well and bring them both together. And if we can do that, it's a win-win.
Thanks, everyone. We have this series of videos on our website and on YouTube, and I just find them all really inspiring and love watching them myself. So I hope you enjoyed that. Karen's going to pop up the slides for me just now. And the first thing I'm going to look at talking you through is around the routes to collaboration that we have. So routes to collaboration really depend on both the type of the landowner and the kind of thing that it is that you want to achieve. So if we're thinking about, oh, great, thanks, Karen. It's just coming up now. So just onto that second slide. Thanks. So Lisa very helpfully put this together, this diagram for me. So in terms of thinking about the type of landowner, we do sometimes need to treat different types of landowners differently. So public landowners may be treated differently to other kinds of landowners. And actually we've got private landowners in the box there, but by that we mean anybody who isn't a public sector landowner. So that might be charities, it might be faith organisations, it might be private estate owners, it might be companies, all those different kinds of landowners kind of sit in that private box for this diagram, just to make it simpler. So as you can see, if you want to own, manage, lease buildings, you can work either with the public or private sector organisations through negotiation. And you can also negotiate access to influence decision-making about land or buildings. So having a sense of what it is that you want to achieve and who the landowner you're talking about is really important to help you guide through this. Now, we do usually suggest that you try the negotiation route to begin with, that if you can find the right people and have those conversations, it's actually a really helpful way to start any of the other processes which are on the screen. So those are the processes: participation requests, community asset transfer, and community rights to buy. As you can see, they apply to different types of landowners. They're all legal opportunities that you have. So in terms of wanting to influence decision-making about land and buildings, the public sector organisations, you can put in a participation request. Now that's from the Community Empowerment Act, and it is a legal opportunity to ensure that you have that chance to influence decision-making about land or buildings. Now, often communities might be thinking about ownership of land or buildings, but actually what they're really concerned about is wanting to influence decision-making. So that's always an option, either through negotiation or through that participation request route. We then have the community asset transfer route. Now, this applies to public bodies. And again, you can be thinking about management, lease, or ownership of land and buildings and follow that community asset transfer route. When we come back to Karen in a little while, then she will talk to us about where you can find out more information about community asset transfer and where you can see the different kind of routes and options that there are following that process. And then finally, there are a series of community rights to buy. Now, these apply to the private sector, and they are really about ownership of land and or buildings. Again, Karen will come back and share some resources about where you can find out more information about those things. But I'm going to focus really on this kind of negotiation thing. Actually, the tips I share probably apply to all of these different routes, but negotiation is a really helpful way of viewing these processes and a really good way of getting started with things. Next slide, please. Thanks, Karen. So I have 10 top tips for collaboration I'm going to talk you through. Firstly, as with the Newcastleton example, it's really important to establish why it is that you're interested in lease, ownership or management of land and or buildings, and what it is that you think you want to achieve with that. That's a really good starting point for wanting to collaborate with somebody, is having a good sense of what it is that you think is important. What's the purpose of ownership or management or lease? What is it that you want to achieve with that? Secondly, it's really important to find the right person to speak to in the organisation you want to collaborate with. And that can be a bit tricky sometimes, and it might take a little time to identify exactly who that person is. On one of these previous Land at Lunch webinars, we talked about how to find the owner of land, and we can send around the link to that previous webinar actually for anyone who is thinking, well, I don't even know who owns the land that I'm interested in, so where do I start? But finding the right person to speak to is then really important. And on the flip side of that, being the right person to speak to is also really important. So are you the person who can make decisions? Is there somebody else in your organisation or community who might be better placed to have these conversations? Be honest with yourself about that. Am I the right person? And can I find the right person? Those two things are really, really key. Next, it's really important to be open and honest with the other organisation, or organisations, I should say, that you're hoping to collaborate with and hoping to work with. So being genuine about what you're wanting to do, sharing with them the challenges and difficulties that you're facing, the questions that you have, the financial situation, perhaps who it is that's involved. Honesty is a really good foundation for building a successful working relationship, which takes me on to the next point. You'll all have a sense of how you build a good working relationship. So I don't want to patronise anybody here today, but thinking about how you make that human connection, how you show your integrity, so you respond when you said you're going to respond, you are open, you are willing to collaborate, you're willing to think about things from the other person's perspective, you have the little bit of small talk at the start of your meeting. Those things are all really important to building that good working relationship. But you should be thinking about this as a professional relationship, thinking about acting in a way in meetings and discussions and through emails in a way which is actually brings that kind of professionality to it. That's also really important to help people engage properly with each other. The next thing is about agreeing the process and timescales. So if you're thinking about how are we going to take forward this negotiation, this collaboration, we've shared that we're interested, we've shared that what it is that we're thinking about we want to do, we've shared where we think that might be a good place to do that activity. Now, what is the process and what are the timescales involved? And do your very best, of course, once you've outlined that and once you've agreed that with each other to stick to those things as well. Next slide, please. There'll come a point in any collaboration where you're starting to think about actually what are the benefits? What are the reasons why I might be interested from a community perspective in using this land or buildings, or from a landowner perspective, why might I think about collaborating over this area of land or this building? Why might I think about transferring ownership or a management agreement or a lease? And it's really important at that time to start thinking about what are the wider benefits that might be achieved. Really understanding what are the impacts of making that decision might be. So how will it impact on the community in a social way? What impact will it have on the economic feasibility of the landowner, of the community, of the other charity or whoever it is that's involved in that? Is it going to work for them in those kind of ways? What are the environmental impacts of the decision that we're making here? Are we doing things that are positive for the environment? Are we protecting what we have and developing it? And also thinking about the cultural impacts and benefits that might be brought about with these different projects. So viewing it really in the whole, in a really holistic way, is also really important. And sometimes having that conversation, thinking that through, can really throw up some different and interesting things that maybe you hadn't previously considered. It's also really important to be very clear about the constraints that you face. So as a landowner, it may be that it's simply not possible for you to transfer ownership of this area of land. It may go against your governing document, for example. Explaining that to the other party is really helpful. And likewise, as a community, it may be that you need more time to raise funds, for example, as in the Newcastleton example, they needed a bit more time to get things in place to finish feasibility studies. Again, just explaining those constraints is really helpful in enabling the other person to understand your perspective. And coupled with that, of course, is explaining the decisions that are made. So again, being open and honest about that. We've made this decision. This is why we've made this decision. These are things we have to consider. Just being upfront about that, but also helping people to understand your perspective and explain those decisions. The next couple of things about putting aside preconceptions and history and not assuming things are things that come up quite often through our casework, just where one party is really kind of making assumptions about the other because of their understanding of how communities work or their understanding of how landowners work. And actually putting those aside a little bit and trying not to make those assumptions, putting aside any challenges that you've had in the past, any conflicts, to really come to this with a fresh perspective and to think actually all of that is done, but we can choose how we move forward with this. We can actually find another way through this and work together as well as we can going forward. And then the final point I've mentioned is just about considering language. And actually, it's amazing the confusions that can really arise just because one person understands a word to mean one thing and another person understands that word to mean something else. Now, we're all in our own little bubbles in that respect. And I've probably already today said a few things which actually make me fall into that trap too, but trying to be really careful that you understand what the other person is saying and that they understand what you're saying. Doing that check-in process is also really important. Next slide, please. And this is my final point. Communication is just the key to any kind of collaboration or negotiation. Being as clear as you can in what you're saying, as clear as you can in what you need, what you expect, what you hope for. It's just so important. So really, yeah, communication is so important. Thanks, Karen. That's my bit finished just for now. So I'll pass over to you to look at the next bit, which is about resources that people can access to help them sort of negotiate and navigate this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, as Emma was saying, the potential benefits both to communities and landowners are many, and so the motivations there's a range of motivations and a range of resources required to help, whether you're a landowner or a community group, to help you sort of navigate the decision making, the thinking about it. So fortunately, there are a lot of resources out there, and they range from things that help you think through the principles of what is good practice, what is a good way of dealing with this, which the Commission can help you with, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. The actual process, the steps that around governance, legal guidance, the process of working towards acquisition or an agreement, community capacity building. Also, there's guidance on assessing the risks and the opportunities, both for the communities and the landowner, because there's obviously both risks and opportunities for both from both perspectives. So the first thing I'm going to firstly talk about the resources that are available from the Scottish Land Commission. I've just used a graphic from our route map for landowners here, just to give you a sense of the sorts of guides we produce. We've got case studies on collaboration. We've got examples of what people have done, what's worked, what hasn't worked. We've got the protocol on diversification of ownership and tenure of land, and the protocol on negotiated transfer. Now, our protocols are they directly come from the foundation of the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, which sets out the principles that are the basis of the land reform agenda in Scotland. So these protocols we're referring to today are the issues specific to this community access, and they go through what are your rights and responsibilities in relation to diversification of ownership and tenure, and or negotiated transfer, and also what is good practice? What can you expect? What are the sort of steps to achieving a positive outcome, or a satisfactory or an understandable outcome? And there's a lot of that around transparency of communication and just as Emma was saying, good communication. We also, as we're doing here, supply training, webinars, guidance, blogs, and we can give advice on specific cases in relation to land rights and responsibilities. So the Scottish Land Commission, in the Good Practice team, we have a Good Practice Advisory Group, which is made up of bodies that represent different stakeholder groups. And the resources I'm going to recommend over the next few slides are from members of our Good Practice Advisory Group. The first is Community Land Scotland. On the Community Land Scotland's website, you'll find a wealth of excellent information in the form of blogs and guides and webinars on all aspects of community land ownership, from community asset transfer to community rights to buy, and some information on other collaboration options. But if community ownership is your goal, then that is a good place to start. The image on this slide is just a screenshot from their resources page, and you can see that they've made available everything from sample feasibility studies through case studies on everything from community pubs to community hydropower, and both for urban and rural communities. And also Community Land Scotland have worked closely with Scottish Land and Estates to produce very extensive guidance for landowners and communities in the form of a protocol for negotiated sales. And that includes flowcharts for landowner initiated sales and for community initiated sales, where both parties, you can go there and see and visually be led through the extensive resources that are there to support both landowners and communities who are thinking about the benefits to their specific situation that's particularly incurred from community access to land. The next organisation I want to flag up just for resources is the Development Trusts Association, which is also one of our Good Practice Advisory groups that we work closely, group members that we work closely with. So for communities considering working towards an asset transfer, they've created an asset transfer route map and a negotiated sale route map that are helpful in guiding you through the process. They both start with a large graphic, again, taking you through research and development of your ideas, how to get started, and ultimately the transfer itself. They also offer the Community Ownership Support Service, which is designed to support community-based groups to take a stake in or ownership of previously publicly owned land or buildings. So if you're interested in access to a publicly owned piece of land or buildings, that's a very good place to start. They've produced extensive guidance in the form of an introduction to asset transfer, which contains everything that you need to know. Also, from the landowner's perspective, I also want to flag up Scottish Land and Estates, who are another of our Good Practice Advisory Group members, who have some years ago, they published a report called Working Together for Sustainable Estate Communities, exploring the potential of collaborative initiatives between privately owned estates, communities and other partners. So if you are a private landowner, or if you're a community who has ideas for collaboration or for acquiring some privately owned land, that's also a really good place to start. Finally, I wanted to just sort of flag up, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of resources there for groups that want to acquire land for specific activities. If you want to acquire land for food growing, for hutting, for community renewables, nature enhancement, or supporting local businesses, there will be resources there to help you. And in Lisa's links that she's going to send you after this event, you'll be able to find all of that. So now we're just coming up to the section where you get to ask the questions that you would like from us. Hopefully you've been posting questions in the question and answer function of Zoom. I'll just unshare my screen just now, but if you haven't yet posted your questions, do post them in.
Thanks, Karen. I'll just share the first question that we've had in, if that's okay. And I think it's one that you can maybe answer. So the question is, it was about the Newcastle video and whether there are other case studies that we can share and that people might be able to use to find other information to understand how other organisations have taken this thing forward?
Yeah, there's a range of case studies, both on the Scottish Land Commission website and on the websites of those partners I mentioned. Within the Commission website, you can find case studies of collaboration where communities have reached management agreements with owner partners, and also examples where communities have gained ownership of land. So if you go to the good practice section of the Scottish Land Commission website and scroll down to the bottom, you'll often see links to case studies, and there's a search function where you can find case studies as well.
Thanks, Karen. That's great. Actually, you mentioned management agreements, and one of the case studies I quite like of our website is the one about Doon Ponds, and just where the landowner has put in place a management agreement with the community, and the land wasn't really being used for very much. I think it was an old quarry site, but the community have started managing it, and it's now a really lovely nature reserve that you can go around and access. So that's one of the ones I particularly like off the website. I have another question as well here, Karen, and it's about the what can be the challenge for communities sometimes in knowing how to engage with the public sector and knowing how to who to talk to within the public sector if they're interested in public land in particular. Do you have any sense of where people could start if they were trying to find out who to speak to?
I think I would suggest people start with the Development Trusts Association and some of the guidance supported there. There's a lot of guidance around public sector landowners. Was there a specific issue you had in mind, Emma?
No, I think it was just a general question about if you've seen a piece of land or a building that you know is owned by the public sector, but actually you go to their website and there's lots of different departments and it can be quite complicated to work out who to speak to. So it was a question about how would you find out, basically. And yeah, I agree, DTAS, the Community Ownership Support Service, can be really helpful there. But actually, sometimes if you ring up the local authority, they always have an email or a phone number for kind of a general reception kind of desk, or and they will be able to help you hopefully find who the right person to speak to is as well. That's probably, just looking at the time, about all the time we have for questions, Karen, I think.
Thank you for being on the case with timing. I just see that Philip Coghill has added another useful link there on guides and case studies. So that's
absolutely. Yeah. So High is Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and actually we share an office with High now, so it's really bad of us not to have mentioned that, isn't it? But yeah, High also have some really helpful resources on their website. So thanks, Philip, for sharing that. And they also can offer some particular support as well in certain circumstances. So always worth getting in touch with them to see what it is that they might be able to help with.
So just before we bring the session to a close, I'd like to hand over to Lisa, who has another poll for you.
Yes, I have another poll. Thank you so much, everyone, for the feedback that's been happening in the chat today. It's really helpful to hear all of those suggestions and hear those thoughts around how these events should be shaped. I'm going to start the chat, the poll, our next poll now. That should be it launched. So give me a shout if you can't access that or can't see it. Again, this is I think this is 5 questions, and there is an open text box at the end for you to put in anything that we haven't thought to ask in a specific question. So again, I'll be quiet and let you get into that. All right, fantastic. I think we're there. And yeah, once again, thanks so much. I'm going to end that poll now, and I'm going to hand over to Emma for the final section of our webinar.
Thanks, Lisa. So this is just to highlight the next session that we have. It is called Emerging Impacts of Land Use Change for Net Zero, which is a bit of a mouthful, actually, isn't it? That's on in 2 weeks, same time, and you can sign up at the website as per usual. The webinar next time is myself and James McKessick-Leach, my colleague, and we're really going to be looking at what we're starting to see as the impacts of significant land use change happening around us. So we know that the drive to net zero is resulting in significant land use change already, and we know that we're likely to see more land use change. But what does that actually mean for communities and other people as well? What does it actually mean for them? What will the impacts of that be? How is it changing things in the market? How is it changing things for communities? So we'll be having a discussion about that, sharing some of the work that we've previously done and some of the research on this question at the next section. And of course, there'll be time, as usual, for a Q&A as well. So come prepared with all your questions. We like it when people have some tricky questions for us to think about and answer. It can be really helpful to help us shape up our thinking, actually, and to understand what other people think too. So thank you for that. Lisa is going to pop in the chat the address if you want to sign up for our newsletter. Now that means that you would get information about all of the things that are coming up, different ways to get in touch with us, and anything that we consider to be sort of significant news in and around land reform. So things around the Land Reform Bill, for example, might be shared through our newsletter. So do sign up if it's of interest. Other than that, just to say thank you, everybody. Thank you, Karen, Lisa, for organising and leading the session today, and thanks everybody for your questions and comments. It's really helpful just to hear from people in the chat and through the Q&A session as well. Thank you so much.